Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to call the City of Homestead City Council Budget Workshop to order. The city will hold a hybrid council workshop. The public may participate in person at City Hall or virtually utilizing video conference via WebEx events or the toll-free conference call number. Please go to cityofhomestead.com/calendar for specific details and instructions on participation utilizing video and telephonic conferencing. The meeting can also be viewed live on the City Access channel or City website at cityofhomestead.com. Public comments can be made in person at the meeting or emailed to publiccomments@cityofhomestead.com. Written public comments are limited to 300 words per comment and it should include your name, address, and your comment. It may be submitted up until 30 minutes after the end of the workshop, and such comments will be included in the minutes. We have a roll call, Madam Clerk.
Councilwoman Bailey?
Here.
Councilman Roth? Councilman Fletcher?
Here.
Councilman Shulley?
Here.
Councilwoman Avila?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fairclough Staggers? Mayor Losner?
Here. Again, thank you all for being here this afternoon. Our one and only item this afternoon is a discussion item, tab 1, car number 3263, fiscal year 2022 budget workshop. Madam Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're going to begin today's workshop with a presentation by our finance director, but before we begin, I wanted to provide just a little bit of background. At our last budget workshop on July 13th, in response to Council's directive to let you know what staff needed to get the job done as best we can, we asked staff in all the general fund departments to provide a wish list. And we presented that wish list at the July 13th workshop with the corresponding costs to cover how much each item would cost and the millage that would meet those costs. At that time, we were also facing a potential gap of about $467,000, in response to which the council set a tentative operating millage at 7.75, which, as you know, went out on the trim notices. Since then, and also in response to council direction to examine our own efficiencies, we asked all of the departments to prioritize their wish list into an A, a B, or a C, with A being essential to get things done, B being important but not essential, and C being something that could wait. So a very important point also is that since July 13th, the revenues have come in much higher than expected. So today we're able to present you with a balanced budget with no gap, no impact to fund balance, and the balanced budget, no increase to the millage, but it includes some of the staff A requests. Not all of them, but some of them. And as directed by council, we kept the focus on parks, development services, and police. As such, we were able to add some staff to parks, to development services, and to fund a number of police CIPs, but the budget that Carlos is about to present doesn't include more police officers or more code officers. However, included in the presentation will be the cost for that and the corresponding millage rate that would cover that cost if the council would like to go in that direction. And with that, I will turn it over to our esteemed finance director, Carlos Perez, for his presentation. It's pre-recorded.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. The purpose of this workshop is to provide you an overview of the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget. As part of the overview, we will update you on the changes to the general fund budget since our last workshop on July 13, 2021. Although staff is presenting the Council with a sustainable, balanced budget that does not require an increase to the millage rate or the use of reserves, there were additional requested items by departments and/or Council that are not included in the proposed balanced budget. Should the City determine to move any of these forward for funding, these would require an increase to the current millage rate to generate the recurring revenues needed to support these recurring expenditures. As part of the presentation, staff will provide you with the incremental rates necessary for each request. At the July 21st, 2021 meeting, Council established a preliminary tentative millage rate of 7.75, which was advertised to all residents in their trim notices. This workshop will show that the proposed balanced budget being presented by staff today requires no increase to the millage rate. However, if Council was to consider increasing the millage rate in order to fund remaining additional requests, you will see that the required millage rate to accomplish this would be well below the 7.75 approved tentative millage rate. While the primary emphasis of this workshop will be on the general fund, since the primary source of recurring revenues is property taxes, this workshop will also provide you with an overview of the entire city budget. Earlier this week, you were all provided with a proposed budget book, Numbers Only. This presentation is a summary of what is in those books. However, the Council will have an opportunity to ask staff questions they may have on the information presented in those books. The ultimate goal of this workshop is that together, Council and staff will agree on a proposed budget to be presented to the public at the 2 budget hearings in September. The following slides will provide you an update of the general fund from what was presented on July 13th, 2021 through today. First, let's take a look at the updated general fund revenues. On July 13th, based on the estimates staff had at that time, we were projecting $53,672,000 in revenues. When compared to the base budget we had developed through that date and before considering any of the additional department requests, we were looking at a gap of approximately $467,000. Since then, we received new estimates for the half-cent sales tax that increased estimated revenues by approximately $563,000. Although the state has not yet released their estimates for the communication service tax revenues, staff is confident with estimating an increase of approximately $287,000. In July, we budgeted approximately $290,000 in a transfer out to the CIP fund to fund certain general fund CIP projects. Since then, we have identified the CIPs to be funded with that transfer, thus releasing the balance for other purposes. These increases in estimated revenues provided us a revised budget of $54,746,385 in total revenues to cover not only the base budget presented at the July 13th, 2021, but also some of the operational needs deemed to have the highest priority. When we compare the fiscal year 2021 revenues to the fiscal year 2022 revenues, we can identify the more significant increases in revenues as shown on the slide. Clearly, property tax revenues of approximately $1.28 million from increased property values continues to provide the most significant increases in revenues. Now we turn to the expenditures. If you recall, on July 13th, 2021, when we presented the base budget, we identified increases of $1.9 million, primarily due to COLAs, health insurance, police pensions, and the elections. Since then, and as a result of the additional revenues identified earlier, coupled with efficiencies undertaken, we have been able to fund increases in staffing, operations, and certain police CIPs. As shown earlier, we went from a gap of $467,298 on July 13, 2021, to now having the ability to fund $606,488 of operational needs shown on this slide. This ability resulted from the additional revenues since July 13, 2021, as identified earlier, along with certain efficiency measures taken. Examples of the efficient measures taken include funding the building services coordinator and the permit clerk for the building department, as well as the PC coordinator for the ITS department, by reductions in existing professional services contracts or by reducing contracted temporary staff. Another example was funding the replacement of a code enforcement vehicle with solid waste funds, because the vehicle was for a code enforcement officer dedicated to the solid waste activities. As mentioned earlier, with the exception of last year, annually we budget approximately $290,000 as a transfer out to the CIP fund to fund certain CIPs. This year, the transfer was reduced to fund the projects listed on this slide. The balance was used to fund other operational needs listed on the previous slide. Keep in mind that some of the impacts reflected here are the result of equipment financing. We have presented to you how we transition from the projected general fund gap to a balanced general fund budget that includes many of the high priority items presented at the July 13, 2021 workshop. The following slides will cover an overview of the entire city budget. Property taxes for the city are a result of two components: property values and the millage rate, also known as the tax rate. Property values are assessed by the county, not the city. The Miami-Dade County Property Appraiser's Office is responsible for assessing property values. The city assesses the millage rate, which represents the amount to be paid for every $1,000 of a property's taxable assessed value. It is important to note that the operating millage rate only impacts the revenues of the general fund and the CRA. Another interesting note is that while property values have continued to increase over the last several years, they are still 5.4% lower than they were in fiscal year 2009. This is still one of my favorite slides, and although one would look at this slide and think that it is incorrect and that I have mislabeled the slide because clearly a proposed budget for fiscal year 2022 of $54.75 million is greater than the fiscal year 2007's adopted budget of $47.14 million. However, one needs to consider that since 2007, the population has grown by 32%, and the consumer price index of all items has increased by 30%, while the city's general fund budget has only increased by 16%. I think we can agree that the city is doing more with less. This is an overview of the general fund sources of revenues. Much of the discussion regarding the general fund's budget involves property taxes, also known as ad valorem taxes, which makes up almost 36% of the funding for the proposed budget. The state shared revenues make up over 20% of the general fund's revenues. Other revenues also represent just over 20% of total revenues for the general fund, and they primarily include intergovernmental charges for cost allocations. Here is an overview of the general fund's budget by functions. Public safety represents approximately 55% of the city's general fund budget. Please note that while the police budget is at $30 million, property taxes without the library taxes are only at approximately $18 million. Tax revenues only cover 60% of the police budget. Parks makes up approximately 11%, while building and planning and public works comprise 6.5% and 3.4% respectively. The rest of the departments are general government, making up 23.1% of the budget. This slide provides a side-by-side comparison of each general fund's department's prior year adopted to current year proposed budgets. This is a repeat of slide 6, which identifies the more significant changes in the general fund budget from the prior year, and since we first presented this to you on July 13, 2021. Part of the general fund's budget includes the fiscal year 2022 impact of CIP projects being approved as part of this proposed budget. The total cost of the projects are $692,761. But through financing, the impact of fiscal year 2022 is $316,601. These following slides present a recap of the city's capital improvement projects for fiscal year 2022. Electric utility projects include over $6 million in projects funded through the Series 2021 bond. This includes approximately $4.7 million for the new substation and $1.3 million for undergrounding of electrical utility lines. Water and sewer projects include over $5 million in projects funded by grants, including $2.7 million for emergency generators, $1.6 million for the upgrade of the water treatment chlorination system at Whitcott, $300,000 for well number 7, and $500,000 to partially fund an inline booster pump valve and SCADA at the racetrack. For government services, there is a $2.2 million project anticipated to be funded with ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funds. We will discuss this in the upcoming slide. Solid waste includes the purchase of much-needed equipment replacements. The police department includes over $652,000 for equipment, vehicles, and the acquisition of one new canine dog and the replacement of 2 others. Total CIP's project values for fiscal year 2022 are $23,805,534, with over $3.2 million representing recurring annual projects and over $7.5 million of these projects being funded by ARPA, CDBG, or other grants. A detailed listing of the fiscal year 2022 capital improvement projects, as well as the fiscal year 2022 through 2026 5-year CIP plan, can be found at the end of your budget books. This pie chart reflects the components of the enterprise funds. These funds are intended to be self-sufficient and rely on user fees to balance their budgets. The electric utility makes up over 64% of the enterprise funds. This pie chart shows the citywide budget broken down by fund types. The general fund makes up 27% of the city's budget, while the enterprise funds make up more than 53% of the budget. This slide reflects a comparison of the citywide fiscal year 2021 adopted budget with the fiscal year 2022 proposed budget. The general fund we have already discussed. Other notable highlights include the water and sewer fund, which for fiscal year 2022 has been balanced with the assumed rate increase of 3.44%, representing the CPI increase applicable to fiscal year 2022, and for the first time, a second rate increase of 1%, representing the Miami-Dade County pass-through rate increases for the purchase of water and the treatment of sewer. The electric utility reflects a significant budget increase to account for the expenditures of the bond proceeds for the Series 2021 bond issued earlier this summer. The internal service funds include the health insurance fund, which reflects an increase in the citywide health insurance premiums. Impact fees show a budget reduction due to the Losner Park expansion project that began in fiscal year 2021. The total budget increase is only 4.8%. So we have now seen an overview of the budget as being proposed by staff. In the next few slides, we will discuss some items for council consideration that, if approved for funding, would require an incremental millage rate increase. The remaining additional requests for consideration that, if approved for funding, would require an incremental millage rate increase include the following. Council has suggested increased frequencies for landscaping throughout the city, as well as a code rewrite. A few departments are still requesting increased staffing, as noticed on the slide. Non-staff related operational increases include an increase to the park's landscaping budget and the software for development services. After discussing the additional requests, Council can determine if it would like to move forward to fund these items with incremental millage rate increases, or accept the balanced budget as presented at a millage rate of 6.2055. Either option would be a reduction from the approved tentative millage rate of 7.75 mils advertised to all property owners on their trend notices. This slide identifies the additional requests that would require an incremental millage rate increase should Council agree to have these funded in fiscal year 2022 budget. If all were to be approved, the millage rate would increase by 0.9996, or the equivalent of approximately $1 for every $1,000 of assessed taxable property value. If all requests were to be approved, the millage rate would be set at 7.2051. This slide summarizes the incremental impacts by function. On this slide, we see the summarized incremental impacts to a taxpayer whose house is assessed at a $100,000 taxable value. If all requests were approved, the taxpayer would be paying an additional $99.96 for every $100,000 in taxable property value. This slide recaps not only what the gross costs of the request are, but what the impact of the fiscal year 22 budget would be if we consider some equipment financing and other cost deferrals to future years. For example, While the estimate for a code rewrite was projected to be $1 million over a 3-year period, the impact of fiscal year 2022 would be approximately 1/3, or $333,333. The table goes on to show the incremental millage rate increase that would be needed to fund each request and what the impact would be for taxpayers with varying property values. This slide summarizes the impact to a taxpayer if all requests were approved for funding. $104,056 represents the average taxable residential value of a homesteaded property in the city. $124,737 represents the average taxable residential value of a non-homesteaded property in the city. These values were provided by the Miami-Dade County Property Appraiser's Office. As you all know, the city has already received half of the ARPA funding allocation of approximately $19 million. The ARPA fund budget was approved through a resolution, and because the funds are treated as if they were a grant, these funds are not part of the city's annual adopted budget process. Furthermore, ARPA funds are not intended to fund ongoing operations and therefore cannot be used for hiring staff. However, as we continue to research what the funds could be used for, we believe that at least 2 of the additional requests could be addressed with ARPA funding. One is the development services software. The other is the issue of cybersecurity. Although the original request for an in-house position, staff will consider contracting the services of a consultant that may qualify as a valid ARPA expenditure. Staff believes that these 2 items could be removed from the list of additional requests that would need incremental millage rate increases, and instead staff will pursue funding through ARPA. So having seen the list of additional requests and the recommendations to remove 2 of these items, let's take a final look at the millage rate. It is important to note that the millage rate only impacts the general fund and the CRA. This slide provides general information about millage rates. By Florida law, the maximum allowable rate for the operating millage is 10 mills. The proposed millage rate of 6.2055 is 5.08% over the rollback rate. The tentatively established millage rate at 7.75 is at 31.24% over the rollback rate. This slide reflects the revised list of additional requests after removing the development services software and the cybersecurity staffing. All in, the total millage rate increase would be 0.7235, or about 72 cents for every $1,000 of taxable property value. This would represent an annual increase of $72.35 for someone whose house has a taxable value of $100,000, $75.28 if it was valued at $104,056, and $90.24 if valued at $124,737. On this slide, we see the revised summary of incremental impacts to a taxpayer whose house is assessed with a $100,000 taxable value. If all requests were approved, the taxpayer would be paying an additional $72.35 for every $100,000 in taxable property value. Trim notices should have been received by all property owners earlier this week, with the city's tentative tax rate at 7.75 mils. To fund all of the additional requests presented earlier, the millage rate would be 7.2051. To accept the budget as proposed, the millage rate would be 6.2055, the same as last year. To fund the revised list of additional requests after removing 2 items to be pursued with ARPA funding, the millage rate would be 6.9290. In all of these cases, the rate would be a reduction from the advertised rate of 7.75. This slide presents a history of the operating millage rates since fiscal year 2006. Between 2014 and 2020, the operating millage rate remained at 5.9215. In fiscal year 2021, the adopted rate increased to 6.2055, but only because it now included the shift of the 0.2840 library tax for Miami-Dade County. The fiscal year 2022 proposed budget keeps the millage rate at 6.2055. However, if council would like to fund any or all of the revised additional requests, then the millage rate could go as high as 6.9290. Here is another view of the millage rate, splitting out the library tax portion of the operating millage rate. Without the library tax and including the fiscal year 22 proposed budget, the 5.9215 base operating millage has remained the same for 8 years. So let's recap. Just to look ahead at what actions council will be taking at the upcoming budget hearings. Adopt a resolution. A final millage rate will depend on a consensus reached at tonight's workshop with respect to the balanced budget or with consideration to increase the millage rate to fund some or all of the additional requests. Adopt by ordinance the budget and the CIP plan, which includes the solid waste budget with reduced frequencies in bulk and recycling pickups. Approved by resolution the increased water and sewer rate increases for the CPI and the Miami-Dade County pass-through. Just a reminder that once the proposed budget is finalized, the budget book, numbers only, will be posted to the city's website by Friday, September the 10th, 2021, to be available to the public prior to the first budget hearing on Monday, September the 13th. The first budget hearing is scheduled for Monday, September 13th at 5:30 p.m., and the final budget hearing is scheduled for Wednesday, September 29th at 5:01 p.m. And that concludes my workshop presentation on the city's proposed budget for fiscal year 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Appreciate that. Very comprehensive. Madam Manager, anything further before I open the floor?
No, not at this time. Thank you, Mayor. No.
And that concludes.
Council, who'd like to kick off the conversation? I'm sorry? Okay. All right. Well, let me break the ice. As you might expect, I have a whole host of questions, but I've got a couple from your presentation. The first is you indicated that the communication services tax was an in-house estimation. When will we have a number from elsewhere that will give us a better guidepost of that?
It's been a while. We should have something prior to the first budget hearing, hopefully before that.
Good. Okay. I was concerned about the timing there. I didn't want to get caught at the very end. Okay. And my next question is kind of tied to some of my observations. You talked about, more or less, $1,096,000 for development services, additional needs, excluding the new software. But yet, in page 3 of our budget book, the impact fees in this budget year are showing a reduction of nearly $4.9 million, which is a 49% reduction from last year. Now, having lived through 2008, I'm kind of reading the tea leaves and saying, is development about to come to a halt? Was this budget year extraordinary? What are you seeing in your crystal ball that shows that kind of reduction, yet still justifying that kind of additional expenditure in development services?
I'm sorry, the reduction on page 3 specifically, could you state the numbers again?
Page 3 of our workbook where it talks about other funds.
Right.
The adjusted 2021 budget was, and I'll speak in round numbers, 9.8. You're showing a proposed impact fee income amount of 4.9.
Those revenues, Mayor, that includes appropriations of fund balance. And later in the book, we can see where we show what the actual revenues coming in from the outside. For years, the impact fees, especially for Parks and Rec, had been accumulating specifically for the Losner Park expansion. last year was the first time where we started the construction, so that's why you see that big number in there where we appropriated those fund balances. So it's a combination of impact fees coming in from the outside and appropriation of existing monies that we still have on hand.
Okay,
And if
so
I-
what are we anticipating apples, comparing apples to apples, this year's outside impact fees versus
If you can refer to
Come-
page 44,
44? Gotcha, okay, I see basically $1,375,000 it looks like, right?
like for parks specifically, the revenue items, the parks revenue it's still being estimated at about $1 million a year. The public works impact fees at about 75,000 for the year. And then you see that the bottom ones where it says police fund balance, those are the funds that basically we're saying is we're using existing funds that are still on hand in order to balance the budget and appropriate those funds for projects for this year.
Okay, right, I guess my basic question is new impact fees this year versus estimated new impact fees next year. That's the number I'm looking at to see if we're anticipating a slowdown in activity.
We don't see any slowdown in activity.
Okay, because, I can't glean that from the numbers in front of us. And again, what aroused my concern was that big proposed amount, almost $1.1 million in new money going to development services. All right. Okay, I asked you about that. And I guess to the manager, and this would probably be as we go back through the budget, where would I find the surveillance cameras that we're talking about for dumping and the English Avenue improvements? Where would we find those items?
That's this year.
Mayor, you won't find it here because what we've done is we've been able to figure out how to do it this fiscal year.
Both of those.
Yes, the second one beside the cameras was what?
Pardon?
When you say both, I heard the cameras and,
English Avenue improvements.
yes. That as well. Yes, that as well. Sir.
All right, I have a lot of further questions, but I'll defer to the council at this point. They may hit on some of the items that I have just going through the book. The council? Councilman Fletcher.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Everyone, good day. Just a couple of quick items that I noticed, going through the process here. I'm going to pick out on some specific line items out of the budget book here today that kind of jumped out to me. So if you go basically page by page throughout the cost factors of the city, I noticed $486,705 annually for telephone service, or telephones that is budgeted throughout the entire budget here. That seems a little high to me for telephone service. I understand we probably have some 911 service fees and basic phone service, but if you break that down, if everybody in this city had a cell phone, that'd be about $90 per person a month for a cell phone. And I know we don't have every personnel in the city with a cell phone. So $486,000 a year, almost $487 for telephone service seems quite unreasonable.
Councilman, it's not all for cell phones.
I
It is
understand.
for okay.
I understand it's not all cell phones, but we should be able to find a different way to help offset that cost somewhat. Most phones these days are voice over IP. I'm pretty sure all of ours in the council in this building are. Very few copper lines anymore, so we need to definitely take a look at that process because that's a large number. Also on page 49, it's in the under the confiscated equipment items. There's a line item there that just says unavailable for $142,000.
Yes, sir. What happened is that several years ago when we were preparing the budget, there were some equipment that we had were trying to fund out of the forfeiture funds for the police. And we found out at the last minute that we could not use the forfeiture funds for those vehicles. So instead, we basically did a swap. There were funds, there were about $99,000 in funding in the police department for safe neighborhood expenditures. So basically what we did is we swapped it because those were valid expenditures to be paid out of LATF. So since that's $99,000 a year and we were going to lease finance the equipment, it was going to be approximately the same thing for a year. We swapped it, but what we wanted to make sure is that those funds did not get expended for anything else because they were going to have to fund safe neighborhood costs over 5 years. And we're kind of like in the third year of it. So that's why those are unavailable. It's not, they're going to be used, but in the next 2 years.
Okay, it just kind of struck me odd that it just said
No, it's a good
unavailable.
question.
You know, I'd rather you have 4 subsurface vortex generators on there than nothing, so.
It's a very good question.
Okay, and one of my last questions until a little later. I noticed we're spending about $475,000 a year on the Seminole Theater. We continue to subsidize that entity, and I know they are making a profit with some of these concerts, maybe not last year, but in previous years. How can we move forward where this becomes a standalone entity, where we're not having to subsidize that with taxpayer dollars? There's got to be a thought process on how we can do this long-term. I know it's not going to happen overnight, but it just doesn't seem like we're focusing on that. We focused on a lot of other things downtown, but that facility, which is a jewel for the downtown, but we just can't continue to cause the taxpayers to fund this thing.
Understood?
Understood, Councilman, and we understand that concern, and I know it's been raised before, and I do want to make one point of clarification, not to suggest we don't need to deal with that, but that is out of the CRA and not the general fund, but understood.
Yeah, it's still a large sum of money that does get funded somewhere down the line by taxpayers. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Fletcher. Councilwoman Avila.
Can we settle on the slide with the options, please, while we continue the conversation? Can you put up that slide? Thank you. And can we request also maybe for the next CRA meeting that we have a presentation about the Seminole and how they've progressed over the last 2 years and their look going forward, so we can take into consideration progress. And I think the answer to that question, Councilman, is to drive more consumers to using the downtown area and building up that traffic flow to enjoy the Seminole Theater. So I look forward to seeing that. I want to first also thank Mr. Perez and staff for putting together this presentation. It answered a lot of questions through your presentation, and this was a lot of work. It's not easy, and I appreciate your efforts. A balanced budget that still includes increases for Parks and Recs and Public Works and our police department is highly appreciated. I had the same question regarding the impact fees. It did confuse me at first, but it makes sense now. I'm leaning towards that additional less than $1 million over and above the balanced budget to fund our police officers. And I think that there's just no way we can continue to demand what they have been providing for us all of these years with the budget that we have given them. They have surpassed what we could expect, and they have done way more with less. It's what I hear from the community that we need. It's what I've seen with my own eyes. And that's where I'm at right now, Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further? Council? Okay. Councilwoman Bailey, you ready, or you want to come back? Come back. Councilman Roth.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, let me start off with thanking Carlos, staff, you guys. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of information in this book. We go over it every single year. We make tough decisions. We all want the most efficient city budget we can have. We all understand that over the last year and a half with COVID, with materials, with supplies, with manpower, costs have increased incredibly. We have no control over what the grocery stores charge us for food. We have no control over what the gas stations charge us for gas. And it's impacted everyone in our city, in our state, in our country when it comes to the elevated costs of living expenses. With that said, we sit up here with a fiduciary responsibility to provide services to our community, to our citizens. There's a lot of numbers in these books that some would think have no effect whatsoever on services to the community. I kind of disagree with that because it takes the entire city employee, city staff to keep this city functioning and operating properly. From the folks that cut grass, the folks that make sure HR is intact, the city clerk's office, who works, from what I'm told, sometimes till the wee hours of the morning, putting together agendas for these meetings. Thank you for that service that you provide us. But we also have to provide a service to the citizens of the city. And the biggest complaint that I've gotten over the last year or so is aesthetics, the cleanliness, and public safety. The numbers in these books reflect a lot of different things. They reflect insurance. They reflect maintenance. They reflect overtime, sick time. But what we have to remember is we have to do a job and we have to make decisions, not only for today, but for the future of the city. And when it comes to the budget, and when it comes to public safety, and when it comes to aesthetics and cleanliness, the trash, most of us don't want to live on a street that's got trash on it. A few weeks ago, I was driving through the southwest section of the city. City staff knows that I was out there. Councilwoman Bailey knows I was out there. In fact, I asked Councilwoman Bailey to come with me on a ride through the southwest section. What we saw out there was horrendous. A disservice to the citizens in our city. As I was driving through the southwest section, there was a code enforcement officer out there. And I stopped and I talked to him. I said, is this normal? For all this trash? Piles. Not just in one location, spread throughout the southwest section in the city. Is this normal? Sir, we do the best we can. We try to identify the trash. We try to identify who put it out here. My point is, things are expensive. Things cost money. If you want the best, you have to pay for the best. We want the best police department, we will pay for the best police department. We want the prettiest city, aesthetically, we have to pay for that. Whether it's within the rates that are set today, or do we challenge management to look deeper Is there waste? I don't believe there's a lot of waste. I sat up here for 6 years. Carlos is a tremendous asset to this city. He understands what it takes to run this city financially. And it's hard for us to make these decisions. It's hard for us to ask the taxpayers if it's necessary to pay a little bit more for better services. Do you want a cleaner city? Do you want a safer city? The tax rates are going to affect all of us sitting up here. We all own property in this city. We all pay taxes. My hope is that we don't have to raise taxes. But my hope is that we can provide more police officers, at least one more code enforcement officer, if not two, and also technology for our code enforcement officers to be able to go after the offenders. I drive up and down the city all the time. You know, the east side's not as bad as what the west side has become, the northwest and the southwest sections. The stories I tell you are real. The trash is real. We have to give our staff, our police, our public works, our code enforcement, the ability and the tools to do the job that we are asking them to do. And I will ask city staff, this is not the final day to make our final decisions. Can we find these dollars? You know, I'm going to ramble on just a little bit longer. But a few months back, we were in labor negotiations, fighting over 1%, 0.5%, 2%. And that same day, we came into a meeting in this chamber. And the insurance companies said you have no choice but to pay a 14 to 20% increase in your premiums. To me, that's not fair. We were forced to do that. And what does that do? That takes revenues out of the city pockets. Well, we can't provide those services to others. But yet we couldn't negotiate a percentage or 2% for our IBEW guys, for our police officers. But the insurance company walks in here and tells us, you have no choice. We are increasing your rates 14 to 20%, whatever that number was that day. And I was very offended by that. I'll end it now. Thank you, Mayor, for that. My most important things are public safety. We have to find it somewhere in our budget to increase the police department's manpower, technology, and code enforcement for the aesthetics and the beautification of our city. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Roth. Ready, Councilwoman Bailey?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you to our finance department. Thank you to all of our departments. I know that everyone has done more with less, especially in these last couple years. So I wanted to start with a heartfelt thank you. I agree with everything that's been said here this afternoon. Public safety continues to be one of the top things that I hear. As far as the aesthetics, I think that that goes hand in hand. I've also spent a lot of time in the last year thinking about ways that we can start campaigns and what we can do to really tackle all of this illegal dumping. I've been in contact with quite a few residents who have also had enough and are willing to help, and talking to neighbors. I think that that has been one of the biggest things that has made a difference, is neighborhoods coming together, especially in the Southwest. We're lucky to have a mix of businesses and residents and churches. So code enforcement is incredibly important. But I think that having enough officers to be able to go up and down our streets also makes a huge difference and takes care of more than just illegal dumping. That was one thing that came up in most discussions, is that right as the pandemic was starting, there was a lot more police presence, it felt, in some neighborhoods, including the Northwest. I have a couple residents in the Northwest as well that I've been speaking with, and that there was so much less dumping when the officers were coming through. So for me, public safety, I would also like to see us not include taxes, not increase taxes, but at the same time, we do want what's best for our residents. So I hope that we can find a way to be able to increase our officers and make sure that the departments have what they need. And just for this next year, to continue doing everything we can with still a little less until we see how our residents are doing, how the new tax increase looks for us. So that's where I am right now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Shelley?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess just give direction to staff based on kind of what you guys are looking for. I mean, I've been here, this will be my 12th budget. You know, I haven't raised the millage rate yet. I don't plan on doing it before I leave. So, I mean, my direction is I'm not going to be supportive of any type of millage rate increase. I do want to commend staff, though, for working so hard on this budget, but also last budget. You know, I know you guys saved, I think, a couple $1 million in last year's budget, you know, after we went through this process in a time that was even tougher than this time. You know, if there was a time for me to have been willing or convinced to have raised the millage rate, it probably would have been last year, given all that we were facing with COVID and some of the big shortfalls we were facing at the time. But you guys were able to pull through and do a great job and ultimately balance that budget this year, which has led to the ability to balance and actually have a surplus this go around. So I want to commend you guys for your hard work and the council's hard work up here as well. I know we were a big part of that process last year and this year. I'm trying to figure out how to get us where we wanted to be, given the windfalls or the headwinds that we were facing at the time. And so, you know, commend all of you guys also on your hard work on working with staff. But that's primarily my direction. I'm I support what my colleagues are saying as far as, you know, trying to find a way to support the public safety aspects of things. One thing I did want to raise on the code, and more so for future for thought, not so much for budget purposes, but on code, you know, I think at some point we as policymakers are going to have to give staff direction that that's a priority of us, because until we let them go full throttle, they're somewhat hesitant to enforce that code, because ultimately there's going to be a lot of complaints. Because once you start enforcing the code, once you start issuing those citations, you know, we're going to get phone calls. And so until staff is confident that we are going to stand behind them, that we're going to take that heat that's as a result of the code enforcement actions, you're not going to have a lot of good code enforcement. So I think at some point we need to have that discussion, give that clear direction, whatever that direction is. And if a clean city and a code enforced city is a priority, we need to let staff know that and the police department know that, so that they can run, because they will be able to do a good job, but not until they're giving the backing of us that we're going to support them and that we're going to take that heat when we get those phone calls. So that was the only other thing I just wanted to kind of raise, more so for future discussion than budget related. But I think that's all I have for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Shelley. And I tend, Councilman Shelley, to your position that, you know, while this has been a monumental task, I'm not really interested in raising the tax rate this year. And I think that going forward, and I've got some questions, there's some more efficiencies we can find, but I think the bigger picture philosophy is that we begin to monetize the assets that this city has that have languished, that will enable us in the coming months to make budget adjustments to hire those additional police officers, to hire those code enforcement officers, to do those kinds of things. Specifically, you know, we have a real stream of income coming now from a portion of the Y. We recently gave instruction to the manager and her staff to put out additional advertising, and I hear that, you know, more and more kind of spontaneously coming forward. We have proposals pending for the old City Hall site. And I'm not saying that those are going to happen in the next 30 to 60, 90 days, but if we pick a partner for that site, we could potentially wipe out $662,000, $665,000 a year, mid-budget year, that's now unencumbered, that buys a lot of new police equipment, hires some new police officers, as well as puts additional code enforcement officers on the street. And that's in addition to those who are going to be coming in and talking about being heavy-duty electric consumers and providing additional benefits to the city. So I think we have to get away from this idea that an increase in the tax rate is going to cover everything. Sooner or later, that tax base is going to be maxed out, and we've got to not only be efficient with our expenditures, but look at other ways to produce revenue other than tax revenue. So, I'm not saying here today that we're not going to commit to dealing with community appearance and cleanliness and public safety. I'm saying that this is a process. It took many years to get this far behind, and it's very difficult to do this all in one fell swoop. I mean, the 5 new officers that we authorized last year were a huge jump in the accumulation of the prior year. So, while I want to continue to look at some efficiencies, and if you'll all indulge me and let me talk about that in the next few minutes, I think there are other, not just pie in the sky, but real proposals and real ideas that we know are coming into the pipeline that could help us make some significant changes mid-budget year. Councilman Shelley.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that thought process or that philosophy, because that's ultimately, I guess going back 9, 10 years ago, I mean, that's what we did. We had almost a $6 million shortfall gap that we were covering from, savings year in and year out, because we didn't want to raise the millage rate. We didn't want to raise taxes on the citizens. And our philosophy was to grow our way out of that gap or out of that deficiency based on the housing crash back in 2009 time period. And it took us a long time to dig out of a $6 million hole, but we now have a surplus. For 2 or 3 years now, we've hit either a balanced budget or a surplus, despite the fact that we had this big COVID issue. And so I do think that that's kind of a philosophy that has worked, that as you grow the tax base, as you increase the desirability of your town for people to invest in it, you generate more tax revenues with the same millage rate, and then ultimately can add now new things, assuming we don't have any more catastrophes, going forward. But in theory, that's a philosophy that has worked for us in the past, and I think it's a sound philosophy going forward.
Thank you, Councilman. And if I might, there's 2 sides to every budget, the income and the expenses and the money we're not collecting. And let me just hit some of the high points of my notes. Going back to something I asked about last year, we have line items in the electric utility, in water and sewer, stormwater, and solid waste called bad debt. And as I've said, I'm fast in math but seldom accurate, but it looks like going forward this year with about $1 million in bad debt. Is that something that's been carried forward, or is this reflective of those items that we've not collected or may be uncollectible as a result of COVID?
The line items that you're looking at the budget are basically estimates of bad debt, of what would be considered almost something that would be written off. That's the idea. Because the past year we had a no turn-off policy, it was very difficult to determine what was really truly be bad debt, just because people weren't paying because we weren't turning them off. So I think it was just until recently that people have been notified that we will be turning them off, but at the same time, we're telling them, hey, but this is where you can get assistance, because if you recall, through CDBG and other projects, we have funds to assist people with their utility and rent assistance. So our hope is that we won't have a significant bad debt that we will collect. But to your question, Mayor Lawson, and I know you've asked that, it's really still too early to tell. It might be a couple of months before we really know what the impact of that is.
Okay, that's big. That's a couple of $1 million. and looking at particularly in solid waste, since we're talking about garbage and talking about adjusting perhaps those schedules and what we do. Last year, bad debt and solid waste is $75,000 to $225,000 this year. That's on page 5, I think.
One thing we can do, Mayor, prior to September 13th, as Carlos said, and I know we've been saying it for the last several months, hopefully before then we'll be in a better position to understand what that number might actually be, because we've gotten a pretty good response. Once we started notifying people that we had to start turnoffs, and we were actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the last municipality in Miami-Dade to do so, people have been reaching out. They've been reaching out for assistance, and we're confident that a lot of that will be resolved.
Okay, good, you know, because that frees up the expense side of our numbers that may enable us to do what we need to do for our police officers and other departments. I'll skip over my
Mayor, I'm
Yes.
sorry. That the ones you're looking at are primarily enterprise funds, so that wouldn't impact the general fund.
But would they impact the ability just to keep up in that enterprise, whether it be buying new vehicles and?
Correct.
Sure. I mean, those are, you know, not collecting bills has an impact somewhere.
I misunderstood. I thought you had said police officers, and that's what struck me
Well,
with saying it's not general
Well,
fund.
let's
I
not kid
apologize.
ourselves. We make transfers from enterprise funds. Let's not kid ourselves. I'll hold off on my my CRA, other than since Councilman Fletcher opened the can of worms. One thing I noticed, and I'll get to it, is that in the Seminole Theater budget, see if I can find it here, there was a huge amount, well, not a huge amount,
Page 54.
okay, but the phone amount was almost 5 times what the manager's office phone amount was. So again, you know, who in the world has phones, and why is there that kind of allocation to the Seminole Theater? And I guess we can touch on that when we discuss that budget in detail. I'll just say publicly that there were some significant increases in the mayor and council budget for travel and training that I would, you know, again, last year I kept using the phrase coins in the couch cushions. The coins add up, and every little bit counts.
Mayor, there weren't significant increases. The only increase that was given to each council person was, I believe everybody's planning on going back to the ICSC conference. So every council person, including yourself, was given $2,400 for that.
I understand that, and you know, that may or may not be in the cards for this year anyway. In development services on page 18, there was a pretty significant increase in wages. Is that reflective of those new positions? And my question was, is that also, I know that for many years, and I got this information from the manager, Mr. Cordino's professional fee, or the fee paid to his entity, was $108,000 a year, which has been that amount for many, many years. And I noticed in the coming year, that was cut down to $54,000.
No, sir, it was split. Recently, the law changed where we have to report to the state building fee utilization. And so therefore, we're trying to mirror the expenses in building that are just for building. So since the development services director was being budgeted out of the planning, when in reality he covers both, we split that $108,000 into two, and you will see that line item is 54 in each division. So that was just a split. There were a couple of other things that we had to do like that, realigning between planning and development. But in answer to your question, yes, the wages do include those two positions that were added, but you will see also in building, those were funded by reductions in professional services. You'll see that reduction there.
All right. Just a general question I had, and it's just, you know, not necessarily truly budget related. There's an item for police pension, you know, several $100,000 in obligations for police pension. Help me understand, is that item our net, or is that our amount before assistance from the state? Does that amount reflect payroll deductions?
No, I can tell you exactly what the assistance from the state is. You can find that on page,
I saw that somewhere.
yeah, it's on page 8.
On page 8, police officer retirement amount.
You have firefighters' pension and police officers' retirement. Those are the pass-throughs from the state. That assists us in paying what the pension contribution is for those plans. But again, that's a small part, at least for the police, it's a small portion of what the actual annual amount is.
Yeah, again, I just wanted to have an understanding on that number. That's a significant, amount in the whole budget. Okay. I guess, Mr. Prez, did your department get a couple of new folks?
It's a transfer from a position that was in general administration. So you see a reduction in the general administration and an increase in ours. And you do have, which was on the slide, for a automated time collection system. I don't know if you're all aware, but we're still using antiquated time cards that people have to punch. So we're trying to get everybody on an automated time collection system that will be more efficient for everybody. It may even produce some savings across the board, possibly in overtime. And also, a lot of times when you have grants, especially after a disaster, where they don't just want to know what hours, the number of hours that you work, but from when to when, we don't have anything that digitally captures that because we're using time cards. So part of what's in my budget is what would be the recurring operating cost of getting a system like that. The other portion is in the CIP.
Good, thank you. All right, probably coming down to the end because a lot of my notes had to do with CRA, and we'll deal with that another day. I think I've had my question answered as to the projections about some of this transportation and surtax money and the conflict we have going now. That these numbers contemplate that will be resolved and that spigot will again be flowing. You're more optimistic than I am.
As am I.
Yes. Okay. Bear with me 1 second. That's it for today. So, and I know the councilwoman asked for some of the detail slides. I think there was another one that showed millage for X number of police officers that had some more detail. Can we go
Slide
back
33?
to those?
Yeah, slide 33.
All right, he knows the page numbers of his slides. Okay, so that is for 5, correct? Yep.
For the 5 police officers, the incremental millage rate would be 0.2490. So again, that's almost 25 cents for every $1,000 of value.
All right. So again, I think to echo, I think it was Councilman Shelley's question. What level of direction are you? And there was a big portion of your presentation today that we didn't have in hard form in front of us. Can I get that? Can we get that? What is it? I'm old enough. I like to hold paper in my hand.
I'm not sure which part you mean.
No. There came a point when I hit the last page of the packet, and you were still going with these options. It wasn't included here. Mine ended with fiscal year 2022 proposed budget to date. When you picked up after the basic presentation and you picked up with
My apologies. There should have been
these
40.
options?
There should have been 42 slides altogether.
Yeah, I didn't have that.
And if, I'm assuming then none of the council did, and that's our fault. And There is absolutely no secrets here. You can have that full packet. My apologies that you don't have it now.
No, I mean, and that's fine. I mean, we had it here just so, you always think of things after meetings and come back. And for me, it's easier to digest when I've got it, on a piece of paper in front of me.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, and I say that because I guess, what kind of direction are you looking for today as a run-up to the first formal budget hearing?
In an ideal world, I'd love to get a consensus from all of you as to whether we're increasing the millage rate and by how much. And again, what I mean by a consensus is, if we know that there's an appetite for that. And the only reason I say that is so that, again, as we prepare the final budget that we're going to present at the hearing on the 13th, is that, again, staff and council together as united, this is what we're presenting. And it's really more for the public to then question or ask stuff, but at least that we're all on the same page. But right now, I don't know. I mean, I've heard 2 people that say no, well, actually 4, that said they really didn't want to raise the taxes, and only 1 that might consider it. So I don't know what other guidance you want to give us.
Councilman Roth.
This is what I'm thinking. When you look at the slide we're looking at now, my biggest concern at this point is, again, in code enforcement and the police department. We're looking at adding 2 officers at $255,000, and we're looking at 5 police officers at $787,000 recurring costs. So I'm not sure what the numbers to the gross costs are and why they're larger than the recurring costs, but surely we can find $1 million in a $200 million budget, although it's not a $200 million budget, but overall the city's budget is $200 million. Understanding the enterprise is not part of that. So I challenge you to look for these cuts. Not saying that a minor increase in the millage rate is out of the question from my point of view, but I think that these services are crucial to the city, to the quality of life that the citizens of the city are expecting from us. We were able to provide the body cameras and additional police officers last year. Surely we can find a way to fund code enforcement and additional police officers within this budget without having to increase the millage rate.
Councilman, if I can address 2 of your issues. The first one is the difference between the gross and the adjustment is for the code officers and for the police officers. If we lease the vehicles, there would be a reduction in the cost because we'd be deferring that over 5 years. So that's why there's a slight difference there. If you look at the first one, that's the code rewrite, we're estimating $1 million, but because it's going to be over 3 years, only 1/3 of that would be the impact of fiscal year 22. As to your second question about how do we find this and what we did last year, and I hate to use this phrase, but I don't think we have any more rabbits in the hat, because the $400,000 that we used from the Speedway, which used to be a bit of a reserve or a cushion that we could use in times when we had to balance the budget, not for added services, but because we needed to balance the budget with existing basic services, that's gone now. That's being used now to fund 4 additional police officers. And then moving Seminole Theater to the CRA, that whole operation, what other operations do we have that we can shift over to another department? You don't have those at our hands. So unless you're asking us to slash other departments,
Turn your mic off.
I don't know that it's necessarily slashing other departments. Each department is very vital in the consistency of what the city does. What I'm more looking at is reaching out to those that provide services to the city at a cost, whether it be insurance, fuel, whatever expenses that we incur to keep the city running, parts, materials. Surely there's some ways that we can look at in cutting some of those expenses to bring on some of the more crucial things that I feel we need, and that's the public safety and the aesthetics and the quality of life that having a beautiful trash-free city would lend to the citizens in the city. So that would be kind of my direction, is look to cut as much as we possibly can. We've got till September the 13th before our public hearing. Many of these things are important. Please explain to me code rewrite. And are we talking about the entire code for the city of Homestead? Are we talking about development services code? Are we talking about code enforcement code? Which code are we talking about?
Councilman Roth, Michelle Lopez. I think what we're talking about is the code rewrite that we have been discussing through various council workshops. That may or may not include sections of Chapter 30, all of Chapter 30, Chapter 29, Chapter 32, Chapter 31, and it goes on and on and on. Development Services oversees, I think, approximately 16 chapters of the city code. So at what level does the council want to see a code rewrite? Once that is determined and direction is given to staff, then we can proceed with fine-tuning what that final number is.
And Councilman Roth, if you could clarify, when you speak of direction to look to the services that are provided to the city, if we could get them at perhaps a lesser cost or more efficiently, I'm not sure what you mean.
Neither do I, but that's something I'm just challenging you to figure out. I mean, there are people that will do business with it, just like when we go out for bids on police cars or other things, we go through a process that's already been done where we get the best price possible for that already. We've talked about some of the perks that come with some of these vehicles, cruise control and things like that. Minor little things that save money over time. The mayor brings up, points too, that the Les Jardins lease, okay, that increased, I guess, the general fund by $225,000 a year. There's potentially more things that are coming that, with some foresight and preparation, we know that we may not have that dollar today, but we will have it in 3, 4, 5, 6 months to help, balance the budget later in the year. So where there's a will, there's a way. There's definitely a will on my part to do what it is I have to do to give the police department, code enforcement staff, HR, all the people that work for the city, the tools, the resources, the manpower, that they need to do the jobs that we're asking them to do. It just happens that this year it's aesthetics and it's police. Parks is very passionate to me too. We have, I think, more parks per capita than any other municipality in the county. So we do have a lot of park resources. Yeah, and it takes a lot of money to run those divisions. And Pedro, you guys do a great job. Whenever I call, there's an issue, you're Johnny on the spot, from the stories we get sometimes, from the water fountain at Roscoe Warren Park to the dog park at Roscoe Warren Park to the, just all the little things that we get calls from. You guys take care of those things. And obviously, there's never going to be enough money. But we have to do the best we can with the resources that we have to give, the citizens of the city the best possible amenities and service that we can as a leader. And that's just how I feel about it. I mean, it's a lot of money we're talking about. And if we have to increase the millage rate, by 0.5% or whatever, yeah, there's going to be some pain, but the reality of it, it's only a few dollars. $100 extra a year for 5 additional police officers, for code enforcement, for a litter-free city, which none of us are going to guarantee a litter-free city, but we doggone will be held to a higher standard if we raise millage rates for that. You can bet you that they'll be calling me, the mayor, Fletcher. Well, Shelley may not be here too much longer, but the rest of us, they'll be calling us and say, hey, we're paying extra money. Why is that stuff out in the street now? So there's accountability for that. But if we do what we have to do, then we'll be accountable for that. But again, I can't say it enough. Public safety, aesthetics of the city, is what everybody's crying to me about right now. That's what they're asking for. Thank you, Mayor.
So I think the good news here is that we're all on the same page with the respect to the things that we want to see in terms of public safety, in terms of aesthetic, parks and development services. And we have presented this budget with certain increases in different departments that don't include the police department. And I want to remind the council that last year when we started, in order to do what we did, we cut our budget by $2.5 million. And that was based on sacrifices across the board. Every single department sitting here, the council gave up money to fund one of those police officer positions. And we're hard-pressed, absent changing what we've done in this balanced budget, we're hard-pressed to find another $1 million. I agree with you 100%, Councilman Roth. We're going to do everything we can. And I assure you, when we directed staff after their wish list to give us their priorities, they looked very closely at what they think they need. And I fully appreciate what you're saying and what your priorities are. And to Carlos's point, kind of what we wanted to do. If the direction is to go forward to September 13th with no increase to the millage, but add more police officers and code officers, we can do that. But I don't think we can do that on top of what we have already done. And I just want to forewarn the council that that's the challenge that we are facing. But we will do whatever the council directs.
Councilman Fletcher.
Yes, thank you. So I know we did discuss this briefly in the past in regards to the American Rescue Act. So we've come up with the thought process that we're going to be able to pay for the development services software, that process. I know we don't have all the answers back yet, but I would also think that the code rewrite cost could also be in that if it's looking at, things that are outdated and need to be updated. So let's take a really hard look at those options that are coming for us, because we're going to have almost $20 million over 2 years. And I know we do have some other ideas for some of those funds as well, but if it can help us out this year with not having those impacts for the next 3 years, if you look at this page here in front of us, every line item on there is going to be a recurring annual cost, with the exception of the code rewrite, which is only 3 years. So then we got to take into account that there's going to be raises, there's going to be cost of living and allowances. I can tell you, working for a $150 billion company, that I'm told every year that my budget needs to stay flat. And I fight, tooth and nail, because it's just hard to do when you have annual increases and goods and services costs have continued to increase over the years. But somehow I find a way to do it. My budget has not changed in 11 years. I have not decreased any amount of personnel. I have not increased, but I've found a way to save money every year for the past 10 years. So there's ways to find efficiencies in the things that we do on a daily basis. I pointed out a couple of line items today that really kind of just stuck out at me. Each one of the council members up here for telephones has a $2,000 budget line item. I can tell you can have this city phone back. I'm tired of carrying two anyway. And everybody can call me on my personal phone. That's not a problem for me, and I think we all need to be willing to make some sacrifices like that.
Just a couple of things, Councilman, and your point is well taken. With respect to the rescue money, we're very, very confident, what we said, that we'll be able to fund the technology increases in development services. We think that, and that's a $2.2 million number. We're also, one of the things we did, as you know, we can't hire more people with rescue money, but one of our priorities was a cybersecurity person. We are not looking to hire that person with rescue money, but we believe we can hire a consultant. So that, again, is another great efficiency, if you will. And I don't think we can do the code rewrite, but we can absolutely look into that. And for sure, we'll look into what you pointed out with regard to the phone and the cost for that. But again, we are hard-pressed to do everything we want to do. And I'm with you 100%, Councilman, in terms of doing everything we can to save where we can, and we've worked very hard to do that, not just last year, but this year, through, as you know, a very challenging time for the entire world due to the pandemic. But we will look at everything. We'll go again with a fine-tooth comb, but we just kind of need direction how you want us to come back on September 13th. If there's no increase to the millage, okay, and if the priority is other than what we've outlined in the balanced budget, then we will be guided accordingly.
No, I appreciate that, Ms. Manager, and I also appreciate the hard work that all the city staff has put into this. But, you know, from a standpoint of a fiduciary up here at this point in time, I can tell you that times are tough across the entire United States, no less here in Miami-Dade County. The feedback that I've been provided by the people that have contacted me from my district is, you know, they're seeing basically with the 7.75, now that was the trim notice initially, but they were seeing almost a 25% increase in their annual taxable bill. Now, we know $440 of that somewhat was for garbage and sewer, so it's a net sum zero gain. But so that still leaves about a 20% increase when you account some of the items in the county as well, that people are just having a very tough time, you know, chomping down at that number. And I don't, it's going to affect every one of us. I agree with that. You know, some of us may be a little less than others, but at the same token, you know, we have to do what's right for those folks who may not be able to increase their long-term expenses by 20% annually. I mean, that's a tough nut to crack.
I completely understand and agree, and that's one of the reasons we were very grateful we were able to present you with a balanced budget with no increase to the millage.
Okay, well, so I'm going to go along with some of my other colleagues here that absolutely I think we need to move forward with, you know, the increased public safety budget. I'm not sure about the additional public service aids at this point in time. Code enforcement, I think, absolutely needs to be increased, and police officers, I believe we need to continue with this, you know, for at least the next 2 years when I'm here as well, by increasing our employees by at least 5 per year in the police department. But code enforcement items, you and I took a drive out here not too long ago, and we pointed out some items that Crystal addressed very quickly. But she's not always going to be able to do that, and that takes her away from something else she was doing. So we need to get that extra help in there for that organization as well. And again, I understand the park and field additional folks. So the increase in landscaping frequencies, I see an additional $524,000 a year. Is that how I'm reading that? And I know
That's not budgeted.
That's non-budgeted.
No,
Okay, and
that would be additional. And obviously, those other positions aren't budgeted either. What's budgeted are the positions we mentioned in the other departments.
so understanding too that we also utilize, you know, the crews from the local
Yes, the inmate crew.
inmate crews. Absolutely. Sorry, I just went blank for a second. That we utilize those some there as well, so they may be able to offset some of those costs as well if we're able to get them back. That's all I'm saying. So I think from my point of view, I do want to see, you know, at least some of these numbers change with more of a realistic number to include some additional police officers and some code enforcement. But I think we need to look hard at some of these other line items to see if we can offset those with American Rescue Act and or special services from the inmate crews. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Roth?
Thank you. Yeah, just you bring up the landscape frequency. I'm looking at it here too, and if I remember right, isn't our contract for landscape about that number already? And we're talking about doubling the landscape contract? I mean, that's a big number. I mean, our contract right now is, if I remember right, is in the 540 range, 550 range.
That's the number that they gave us, Councilman, when we suggested it.
So if we increased it by nearly 100%, what would that get us that I mean, we only need a few additional cuts each year. Is that, well, I'm not sure what I would understand another $500,000 would be.
When the Parks Director spoke to them, what he explained, what we wanted to see, what it would cost to match what the HOAs get. And that was the number that they gave to us. I don't know exactly how many more cuts that would be or if it doubles it, but we could certainly get that information and bring it back to you. But again, that's not a number that is in the balanced budget right now.
No, I get that, but that it just kind of caught me off guard was I remember negotiating or going through the contract with our current landscape contract, and it was almost that much or just a little bit more than that much. So you're actually looking at doubling it now. I mean, I'd be okay to an extreme if that was like every tree was going to be trimmed properly and, you know, we're going to be well manicured and I don't have to call parks about the overgrown grass in Audubon Park and those things. But I just thought that was a funny number. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Avila?
Thank you, Mayor. So the screen we're looking at right now identifies the wish list of things that we've all discussed about at length. And I've looked up to Councilman Fletcher in past conversations about needing to be responsible with funding our budget healthy and being more proactive instead of reactive. And certainly I agree with Councilman Roth with regards to our landscaping. If we're going to get more than double the services, then I would be more in favor of increasing the landscaping to this amount. But all in all, with this wish list, you're looking at between $75 and $100 a year to finally start funding the things that we are constantly talking about. So are we going to be able to hear from public comment today as well? This is a public hearing, right? I haven't heard from anyone from the public yet. Oh, it's just a workshop? Okay. So are we going to be opening up for public hearing at all?
We're going to have 2 public hearings.
Okay. Right, but for today, so that we can make a decision and give any feedback.
Is there anyone online?
We have one online, but I don't know if she's...
Nobody
willing
with their hand raised?
No, she doesn't have that.
Okay. A quick final comments from me, and I know this is another conversation for another day, but I don't know where $2.2 million came from for development services software, but you can count me as a no if you want me to spend 12% of our Rescue Act money for a software system. That's a hard no. Number one. Number two, we talk about public safety, and I want to make very clear to the men and women under Chief Roll's command that allocation of additional boots on the ground is about police officer safety as well. It's not just about public safety. The chief and I had a long meeting, I think, last week, and he was very, very clear as to their needs, but also recognized that other departments are important as well, and there needs to be a balance. But I understand that the folks in his department, let's call it like it is, they go to work every day with targets on their back. And it's not just about what the public perceives as good police coverage, it's about protecting the lives of the men and women who put on that Homestead Police Department badge every day. And I'm confident that we can find some more efficiencies and look at future sources from either revenue streams or reducing debt that will allow us over the next year to do the entire 5. I don't know that we can do that right now and commit to that, but I want to let the police department know that that is a priority for me as those other streams of income and other drains on our budget are extinguished. That's where that's where I would like to do the reallocation.
Understood. I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor, and certainly that can be the subject of discussion on September 13th. And at that time, the council can also provide the direction with regard to the balanced budget and what you want to see then and now for the next fiscal year.
So again, do you have what you need from us today or no?
Yes, just to reiterate, I mean, we're certainly going to follow up on Councilman Fletcher and with regard to the Seminole Theater, with regard to the costs for telephones and a number of the things that the council members mentioned. And I think we need to look very closely, as a few of you have mentioned, with how we can perhaps have revenues in the next 6 months, even in the middle of the next fiscal year. But what I'm hearing and what I understand is we come back September 13th with a balanced budget, no increase to the millage. And if in fact the council determines they do want to change that on September 13th, they can do so.
I think you've got it. Anything further, council? There are no objections. I will adjourn this budget workshop. Thank you all. Good session.